Well, I was born in Dunedin in New Zealand. I was raised in a very loving family. We were dedicated at the Salvation Army, and that local corps took a real interest in us and included us. And so I sort of did the whole gamut of Salvation Army children's things, and that just developed through into leadership roles and learning music. Janine's parents were appointed as the divisional leaders in my home division. And she came a few months later after she had finished her nursing training. And when I saw her, I thought, if only. And she was gracious enough. I asked her to marry me within 6 weeks because I thought that was a really good amount of time for her to know the best of me without knowing too much about the worst of me.
I did feel a little adrift. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. Friends had sort of, they'd stayed where they were and made new friends. But Robert and I met and I fell in love with him. That happened really, really quickly. And we talked about officership early on in our dating because we both had a call on our lives.
I graduated from university and 2.5 years later we were at training college. And in between we got married, had our first child. I was a rubbish collector. I did adult education in the afternoon. I drove trucks, I drove bulldozers. Janine was nursing until we had our first child. And it was preparation. We were very involved in our corps and it was preparation for college. In my local corps, there were several families who had family members on international service. So we regularly had, in those days, a Sunday night slideshow when people were home from international service. Maybe those days they hadn't been home for 5 years or 7 years, and they'd tell us about what they were doing. And Zambia was one of those places, and Chicken-Kata, where we actually got appointed to, was one of those places. And so when we were appointed there, to continue on a legacy of New Zealanders serving in that place, I thought was wonderful.
But it was quite traumatic because it was so different and, there was often no water, no electricity, there was no family, and so you had this amazing group of people you had never met before and you were thrown into community.
We'd been at Chicken-Kata 2 years and then we went into Lusaka, to the capital, and we were responsible for training officers for Zambia and Malawi. And I did notice over the time there, just my energy levels were not what they had been. I'd been a rubbish collector. I ran kilometre after kilometre behind a truck every day and through tons of rubbish, and so I was fit and strong. And here I was in my mid-30s, but feeling quite tired and lethargic. So I decided to go to a little gym. Now when I say gym, nothing like we know gyms today. I went to a gym just to try and build my fitness up again. And one day I was just there early on and doing some weights, and I woke up about 20 minutes later on the floor. Nearly 2 years later, 18 months later, back in New Zealand after heart surgery, they said to me, "You had a really serious heart attack at some point." And I went, "Oh, that's what happened."
We thought maybe it was just a living. We'd been there for 6 years. We came back to Timaru, a corps in the South Island of New Zealand, and he still was really unwell. I used to watch him. He used to think that he was out of my sight, and then he'd sit on a fence, and I thought, okay, there's something really wrong with a guy who can walk across the road for a few metres and then has to sit down.
It was during that time that my condition just got worse and worse, and Janine had some robust conversation with our GP, and I was sent to have an angiogram, and of course they discovered that I had very serious heart disease, and as a result had almost immediate quadruple bypass. I just turned 38 years of age, so it was huge, really. When we left, this is the same period. This was our last holiday at home before we went to Zambia.
Right. Wow.
My dad, he just a few months later had That's when he had a massive heart attack and strokes and never really recovered.
You know, he was facing death, and what did he really value? And he realised through his own story, he explains that, you know, he realised that, you know, family was important and that you could work and work, but work isn't everything. So for him it was, you know, a huge transformation.
That really caused me to look so much deeper than the energetic, driven, hard-working, determined person. And then who was I? Underneath all of that, surprisingly enough, there was what was a lot more compassionate, not a lot more soft Robert that I discovered, and a person who had been very much shaped by the experiences of Africa and the experience of the heart disease, and there was a person underneath that actually was the person God created me to be. Now I'm still driven, I still work hard, I still really want to get things done, but there's a depth to that now.